r/Nosleep. Posted by u/Go Navy 27. I'm trapped in a city that's been cut off from the world and overrun with monsters, again. This week's theme, a series of unsettling conversations. Eli here. Good news and bad news on the my girlfriend being kidnapped by a water monster front. Which one do you want first? The bad? Alright, well, that one's obvious. I don't have Zoe back, nor do I have any real answers about where she is. She's been gone now for almost 2 weeks. And honestly, it just sucks. I really miss her, guys. I've been sleeping with her little stuffed cat, Delilah, which she left on her side of the bed. It smelled like her at first. Now it doesn't, but I'm still sleeping with my arms wrapped around that blue cat like an idiot, because at least it's something of Zoe's. I've slept outside in a sleeping bag with Waffles a few times, too. He's been depressed. Forgive me for that slight tangent. Anyways, the good news, River has kind of become my friend. Yes, I did go with calling him River. I think it fits him, and he liked it. He's appeared to me as that same blonde-haired boy each time since that I've gone back, so I'm also sticking with him. I did ask somewhere along the way, because, I'm not trying to offend any non-human entity that could fuck me over, even a friendly one, and he thought about it for a while and finally said that he preferred pronouns for whatever form he was currently in. So I guess if he ever shows up as a woman, we'll adjust. But he's taken the same male form every time I've gone back since, so for now he's a him. Speaking of my conversations with River, that's honestly what this week has been defined by, a series of conversations that have freaked me out or worried me. Specifically, there have been 4 that as I write this, I can still recall almost exactly because they concern me. And without my emotional support girlfriend, now is not a good time to be having these conversations. I'm like this close to having a breakdown. Anyway, let's move from Zoe before I cry again. Instead I'll tell you about the aforementioned conversations, which won't make me cry, and instead just make me uncomfortable and possibly nervous. But hey, at least I won't be thinking about how much I miss Zoe. Right? Right. Here we go. Conversation number 1, with River. Like I said, we've spoken several times in the past week. The first visit or two are as normal as a talk between a creature made of water and a lovable idiot can be. I asked him a lot of questions: how old was he, who made him, why he'd taken Zoe, how she was. He dodged most of them. He came close to answering on more than one occasion, but then he'd shake his head and go quiet. Which only confirmed my suspicions that he's being directed by someone. He seems like he wants to talk but feels like he can't. Which then leads into the most concerning conversations I had with him. A few days ago, he let slip a bit more than usual when we were talking. I was sitting on the ground, my back against the railing, and he sat nearby, cross-legged, facing me. Mr. Bailey was between us, I assumed for my safety, though he was beginning to doze off, so I'm not sure how much he was actually paying attention. I'd been there a while. "Why don't you just leave?" I asked. I'd previously brought up my frequently repeated question of who was controlling him and why they'd told him to take Zoe. He'd never answered to fully confirm that, but his silence seemed to prove my ideas right. So now I was going deeper, wondering why he didn't just flee. Sure, he couldn't get out of the dome, but surely he could at least leave this bridge. I had no doubt he could handle the other monsters, and if he changed forms all the time, it'd be pretty hard to track him. Or maybe he could get out of the dome, if he knew where the scientists were. In which case, my question was even more relevant. Why wouldn't he get the hell out of here if he could? I didn't really expect him to answer. After all, he usually didn't. But very quietly, he said, "I can't." I didn't say anything. He cleared his throat and, staring down at the pavement, continued, "They tied me to this river and this bridge. If I try to go beyond the limits, I collapse and the water returns to the river. Then I can't reform for hours. Believe me, I tried." "That's terrible," I said. "They must be pretty awful to you if you want to get away so bad." He looked up at me and smiled a tiny bit. "That's a sneaky way to try to get more information out of me." I shrugged. "Worth a shot. Someday it might work." He smiled more. "Probably not." "I don't know, I'm pretty good at wearing people down," I said. "I wore you down within days. Just imagine what I can do with weeks. Months." River groaned, still smiling. "I can't handle months." I shrugged again. "You may have to. I'm bothering you incessantly until I get my girlfriend back. Or until you tell me what the evil, murderous scientists are using you for and why they created you and how they're forcing you to obey them. Despite the fact that you're clearly more intelligent and independent than they probably wanted. Whichever comes last. His smile faded now. Shit, maybe I'd pushed too far. I did want answers though, and honestly, I did want to help River too. He was my best source of information about both Zoe and the people behind the experiment, and now he was kind of my friend. He didn't respond to any of what I just said immediately. Instead, he got to his feet and headed towards the railing. I figured he was done for the day and cursed at myself mentally. But he paused at the railing, looking down at the water below and then back to me. And after a long pause, he said, "You know, they drilled into me that the people stuck inside were bad people. That trapping and killing them was good for the world. That they deserved to die. That I should attack them too. And I believed it. They even showed me pictures of you and Zoe and said you were the worst of them all." I was still sitting, frozen in shock, trying to process 1, that he was telling me things, and 2, that the things he was telling me were insane. Meanwhile, he just kept going. "But then I met you. And neither of you tried to kill me right away. Instead you insisted on helping me. I still had to take her. I had to. But that's when I began to think about who the bad ones really are." I finally found my words. "Do you have a verdict?" He stared at me, and I could see that same intense sadness in his eyes. When he next spoke, his voice had dropped even lower. I had to strain to hear it. "I don't think you're the bad ones." Then he was gone, flinging himself over the rail like he usually did. This time I didn't rush over to watch him dissolve into the water below. I was still too dumbfounded to move. It sounded like poor River had been brainwashed. Which I supposed wasn't surprising, considering that he was super intelligent by monster standards and probably needed to be controlled somehow. And what happened with Nolan? Though some of that may have been Nolan turning out to be a horrible person all on his own. Maybe it was Caleb's influence. Man, fuck Caleb. Fuck Nolan too. But I was changing his mind. Well, me and Zoe. Having him on our side could be a huge help. I mean, just look at how amazing Waffles is. And River knows a lot about the scientists. I can tell. I just have to get him to talk. At this point, maybe you're like, Eli, that was more of a depressing conversation than an unsettling one. Where's the stuff that makes you nervous? To that I say, kindly fuck off. Was that not unsettling enough, to hear that the scientists who murdered an entire city for science are calling me the bad guy? But also, you're right. Because the next day is what really made me uncomfortable. I went back, obviously. River came up to greet me, like usual, but this time his form wouldn't stick. By that I mean he tried to appear as the same blonde-haired guy he'd taken to, but he couldn't hold it. Portions of his face and body kept being washed away by his little internal currents, swept out of focus, collapsing and revealing the swirling water underneath. It looked like he was falling apart, like the water holding him together was instead eating away at the surface of his skin. Immediately it was obvious something was wrong. His face, when it was there, was pained, his eyes deep wells of motionless blue. Before I could say anything, he spoke, and his voice was falling apart too. It kept fluctuating between a normal human voice and the bubbling water over stones sound of his natural voice. He couldn't seem to control it. "They punished me for talking to you," he said. "I can't do it anymore. It hurts too much." He was already making his way back to the railing. Usually his movements were fluid and smooth, now he was jolting forward, spraying water droplets at every step. "No, wait, River, tell me what happened," I insisted. "I'm sorry," was all he said, and this time he didn't even make it over the railing before his body fell apart, letting the shapeless water fragments drop to the river below. I found myself unexpectedly angry. However they'd punished him had clearly fucked him up. And they claimed I was the bad guy? Most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, and that's saying something, considering the shit you hear in high school hallways. And, okay, I felt a bit guilty too. Because I'd been the one to push him to talk, and that's why they'd punished him. So that's the real unsettling part. I don't know how they punish a creature made of water, but I'm sure it isn't pretty. Watching River struggle to hold his form together definitely wasn't pretty. I feel bad for him, and now I may have lost my only solid lead at getting Zoe back. Plus, there's clearly more going on there with the scientists than I realized. None of which is good. Picturing them torturing him, and torturing Zoe, because if they don't hesitate to torture a water monster, I'm afraid of what they might do to a human they hate, makes me cringe every time. I haven't seen him since, by the way. I've gone back a few times, hoping, but no matter how much I stand on that bridge and scream and kick chunks of concrete over the edge, he doesn't come. So now I'm worried about my girlfriend and the water creature that took her. What a weird fucking world I live in, huh? Anyway. Conversation number 2, with a dying person I don't know. I won't recount the details here, but one day this week when I was out destroying cameras with Jake, the bookstore owner, and Waffles and Mr. B, we came across a dying woman. Already sat on its own, right? Obviously. But do you guys remember that idiotic teenage boy I told you about? No, not me, you smartasses, who ignored my warnings, and then I subsequently found him dead, with only a single knife wound in his stomach. Yeah, well, this woman was similar. She had several stab wounds across her chest and abdomen. We found her in an alley. She dragged herself in there to be out of monster sight, I think, based on the trail of smudged blood behind her. It was too late to save her. Even if Zoe had been with us, it wouldn't have mattered. She'd lost too much blood and was breathing shakily. I crouched beside her and held her hand. I didn't want her to be alone when she died. Dying is bad enough, dying alone is worse. I was desperately curious about what had wounded her, but I wasn't going to ask. I mean, the lady was dying. I'm not heartless. But she volunteered it. Her eyes found mine, and between breaths, she said, it wasn't a monster. It was a man. A person. This is exactly the concern I've been unable to shake. We've seen a few more bodies with human weapon-induced wounds since the teenage boy, and I can't silence the little voice in my head insisting it's a person doing it. But why would a human turn on other humans when the monsters are already decimating everyone? It'd be cruel. Not to mention fucking stupid. Still, I didn't want to jump to conclusions, even with my heart immediately speeding up. I hoped she couldn't feel the sweatiness of my palms. Are you sure? I asked gently. Did you take its hand? You know, thinking it was probably a modified MJ. Which would be terrifying, but still better than people turning on each other. No, she insisted. Then coughed. It was a man. He had pupils in his eyes. I didn't do anything. He just stabbed me. That made my blood run cold. It also pissed me off. Like, we've all got enough dangers we're dealing with in this hellscape already. The last thing we need is some maniac murdering other humans. I wanted to ask her more, you know, what he looked like, that kind of thing, but she coughed one final time, and then her head fell to her chest. Before I could say anything, she was gone. Gently, I pulled my hand from hers. She'd still been holding it when she died, and I hadn't realized just how tight she'd been squeezing until I saw the red marks on my fingers. Like she'd been trying to hold on for dear life. God, sorry. Not a good choice of words. My bad. Anyway, that conversation has obviously bothered me. Now I've got to worry about monsters and people. Because what I really need right now is more on my plate. On to conversation number 3, with Oliver. This one makes me a different type of uncomfortable. I've told you how I have to comfort him most nights. It's gotten a little better, now he wakes up and calls for me probably every 2 or 3 nights. Mr. Bailey sometimes stays with him too, which helps. But a few nights ago, he woke up crying and came and knocked on my bedroom door. Instead of taking him back downstairs to his usual spot on the couch, I let him into the bedroom and tucked him up into the blankets next to me. I even let him cuddle Delilah. She made him smile through his tears. I think Zoe would have liked that. As I was sitting there, reclined against the pillows, Oliver looked up at me in the dark. I expected him to ask for me to tell or read him one of my stories, because that's usually what he wants. But instead, he quietly asked, Eli, do you think my parents are really dead? Or are they floating in a black hole somewhere? Now, listen, I have no fucking idea. I know people were suspended in a timeless, indefinite darkness when they were held inside a mic before being freed, but as for people stuck inside a mic when it collapsed, well, your guess is as good as mine. And I didn't know what answer would scare Oliver more. I sighed. I don't really know. He was still staring at me, his eyes surprisingly dry. Because that's what I dream about sometimes. I'm scared that they're stuck in a black hole. What if they're worried about me but can never come back? What if they keep calling for me but can never find me? He squeezed Delilah closer to his chest. I hope they're dead, he added after a pause. I think that would be nicer to them. I thought of Tristan, how Nolan had let him get eaten by a mic, thinking it was more peaceful than death, and how Tristan had been furious and said it was so much worse than dying. I didn't know what it was like personally, and I sure as hell don't want to find out, but Tristan and Oliver were probably right. Endless nothing probably was a fate worse than death. I swallowed hard. I think it would too, I finally said. But I'm sure wherever they are, they love you very much. I reached over and messed up his hair, trying to lighten the mood before he made me cry. Even if you're the reason I never get any sleep anymore. He smiled. It's not me. You wouldn't sleep anyway. You miss your girlfriend. I exaggeratedly rolled my eyes. Yeah, so what? You're just jealous that I have a girlfriend. He sat up and made a face. Am not. Eli and Zoe sitting in a tree, KISSIN. Oh, now you're in for it. I interrupted, lunging over and beginning to tickle him. He shrieked and laughed, trying to push me off. We probably woke up somebody downstairs, but I didn't care. It was nice to feel like I had a little brother again. Still, Oliver's first question has stuck with me too. Because how do you talk to a 12-year-old kid about stuff like that? I'm not a parent. I'm not good at this serious shit. I should be in college right now and he should be doing homework, playing with his friends, eating dinner with his parents. Yet here we are, him sleeping beside me and my cat in a bed that neither of us owns, discussing his parents' deaths. That's not what he deserves. And I have no idea what I'm doing. God, I wish Zoe were here. For a lot of reasons, obviously. But she'd be better at this too, I think. And that brings us to our last conversation that has freaked me out this week. It's been a hell of a week for mind games and overthinking things, I'll tell you that. Conversation number 4, with an MJ that, surprise. Dash looked like Zoe. No, it didn't fool me, though I'd be lying if I said my heart didn't skip a few hopeful beats anyway. I encountered it while out with Chris, a firefighter in his 30s. He's awesome. Not only does he have great knowledge of the city, he's also a total badass when it comes to first aid and weapons. The man can swing an axe even better than Zoe, and that's really saying something. He lives in the other safe house, and I've kind of informally appointed him the guy in charge there when I'm not around. I trust him to take care of those people. Even Julia. Ugh. Anyway, he's been accompanying more on grocery runs and such. Earlier this week we were out on one such trip when MJ Zoe suddenly rounded the corner and blocked our path. I knew it wasn't her. It couldn't be. She didn't have her axe, she wasn't wearing the same clothes as when River had taken her, and as she got closer, I squinted at her eyes to confirm that yep, there were no pupils. But I still felt disappointed when I confirmed it. What do you want? I asked, entirely not in the mood for this. I already miss her. That's a given. Just leave me alone. MJ Zoe smiled. Oh, nothing, it said in a lilted voice, as if it were singing. But remember how we said you wouldn't always know if the other was alive? She's alive, I said flatly, hoping my voice didn't portray any of my uneasiness. MJ Zoe raised its eyebrows. Maybe she is, it said. Maybe she isn't. Too bad you can't get your new water friend to tell you anything definitive. He's a hell of a lot more direct than you are, I said. It smirked. I didn't like seeing that sinister look in its eyes. Zoe would never look at me, or anyone, like that. He won't be anymore, it said. Besides, it wouldn't be any fun without mind games first. You want to give up, just take my hand. It reached its hand out, palm up, inviting me to grab it. This is pathetic, I said. And then I looked directly at its chest, because I knew the camera was there, and I would have bet money on at least one person watching me right at that moment. You think I'm going to give up now? I followed you for 500 miles, you fuckers. The MJ merely smiled. You're not the only ones who made the trip, it said, and then it simply started to walk away. At this point Chris leaned in and said, you want me to kill it? I'm gonna kill it. He had closed the distance between them in a few seconds, and that MJ never stood a chance. Chris is huge, a few inches taller than me and a hell of a lot broader. Not to mention wielding an axe with the brute strength of a bulldozer. I looked away, because I didn't want to see Zoe's face hacked to bits, but once it was dead, it was oddly comforting to see the decimated body. It made it feel even less like Zoe. Thanks, I told Chris. We spent the rest of the grocery run sharing stories about our friends, though most of mine are now soured by Nolan's betrayal, fuck Nolan, to distract from what had just happened. It was only afterwards, when I was lying in bed that night, that I really thought about what MJ Zoe had said at the end. You're not the only ones who made the trip. I suppose it could just mean them, but I don't think so. The way it was said, I'm pretty sure the MJ was implying something else. Maybe some of the original monsters were brought here, and they hold grudges. Maybe River was actually in Trial Alpha 2, and we just never encountered him. Maybe somebody survived who they didn't expect to, and they forced them to come here and suffer again. I just don't know. But I don't think it's good news. So, yeah. That was my week. It's been a real emotional roller coaster here, You know? At least I have Mr. Bailey, because not having Zoe while all this is happening is a struggle. She's so much smarter than me, I know she'd be putting things together left and right. Maybe that's why they took her, because they know I'm a dumbass. I'm not sure what to do about River. I'm not sure what to do about the human murderer on the loose. I'm not sure how to comfort Oliver. And I'm not at all sure what the MJ meant, or if it was just another mind game to fuck with me more, which is a real possibility. It's like a puzzle with constantly changing pieces. Not my favorite. I don't even like normal puzzles. I also feel so alone, guys. I know I'm not alone anymore. But there's no one I can talk to like Zoe. Mr. Bailey is the closest option, but even he isn't the same. He is a great cuddler though. Don't tell him I said that. He doesn't need the ego boost. Wish me luck on figuring out anything that's happening here. God knows I need it.